What's up? Welcome to another brand spanking new episode of Movie Schmovie. This is episode number 282. That's the right episode number, right? Am I?
Yep, 282.
That felt right when I said it, and I just want to make sure that it's the right. It's a fact, right?
Episode 282, a palindrome.
There it is.
It
There
is. Much like
and
one of the movies we're going to be
you go.
talking about.
Before we get to that, I'm Steve. Who else? I'm pointing all around, but who's here?
I'm Ron.
We live in a twilight world.
Yeah.
We do.
But yeah,
I'm John.
That's John. I was waiting for that. But yeah, we're gonna be talking about.
You're supposed to say there are no friends at dusk. I guess I can't trust you guys now. I know you're not. You're not actually members of Tenet.
I don't know that I've seen it enough to remember that. It's the kind of we'll get into that a little later. But yeah, we're gonna be talking about Tenet, one of the movies we're gonna be mentioning, having a little bit of a conversation about. But we're gonna be talking a lot about news today. A bunch of new stuff coming out this week, or news items dropping this week, right around the time that we recorded this new episode. So, do you guys want to do the reviews up front, or we were kind of talking about that? Is that the plan, or what?
Are we going to do it? Are we going to pull a Christopher Nolan twisteroo and put the review up front and and then just run out the clock talking about news?
Yeah.
We'll invert the whole podcast format. Yeah,
invert the whole podcast paradigm. I think we're going beyond just format.
If you could cue up our music at the intro and play it backwards, that'd be great too, John.
I'll probably have some fun with the edit.
Yeah.
Or I'll get really up to the last minute and decide there's no time for fun and we'll just get very straightforward audio.
Yeah.
So then, let's do it. Let's talk a little bit about Tenet. I mean, this was one of those movies that we've been talking about since the start of this pandemic. Because I mean, of all the movies that kind of the major studios, the big filmmakers, the big marquee titles for this year that kind of made their move when it came to what to do in terms of the pandemic and theaters and what was available. Tenet, Christopher Nolan, Warner Brothers, that group, they were like the one that kind of was holding out, moving around, sticking to the idea of, wanting to release it in theaters, this major blockbuster, huge budget movie, as all Christopher Nolan films seem to be now. And, and they released the movie, where it could be released here in the States right around Labor Day. So, and it did what it did. It didn't really make much money here in the States, but I want to say internationally, I do think it grossed over 300 million, which I think is a huge loss. And that's got to be conceded as a failure. I mean, I got to see the final numbers on this, but I mean, this week when we're recording this is kind of when they released the movie in the digital formats, and they basically upheld the standard theatrical window where they did the 3 months, and they're a purist in that sense, and so is he. And so now that it's finally come out, we finally been able to see it and talk about it. So I don't know, Ronald, I think you saw it first, so why don't you jump off and kind of tell us your take on Tenet, Christopher Nolan's Tenet.
Well,
yes, you were the one who was here at the earliest point in the time loop of us seeing the movie.
Some version of yourself was there.
Right.
I don't know which one it was, but
we don't know what past that was for you.
So one of the things that was sort of the big headline of this movie was Tenet is going to bring the movie that brings people back in the movie theaters, or at least that was a perception. I mean,
it wanted to.
Pedigree's pretty crazy, like the Batman trilogy, and every other movie that he's done has been shrouded in this sort of excitement. And I can tell you that this is not the movie that will ever bring any human being back in droves the way that he predicted. And I think that part of the reason is it being kind of full of itself, it kind of eating itself alive. And really the bigger idea is this is just a time travel movie. And I'm not trying to insult him. I'm not trying to insult anything about what he does, but that to me sometimes can be sort of the what's damaging about what he does sometimes. Like it's a more pretentious version of whatever was perceived to be M. Night Shyamalan. Like M. Night Shyamalan had a twist. And that was the whole thing. Like, oh, he has a twist in every movie, and that's what makes him kind of who he is. Sometimes I think that what makes him whatever people want to make fun of is him being so full of whatever idea it is. It's presented like something very like a cup is a cup. You know, whether I drink out of a flask or so, it's a container with water in it, right? Whether you spend $500 for it or $50 for it or $2 for it, the container is the container. And sometimes I think that he forgets along the way that that's what makes stories stories, that they are stories. And no matter what you contain in them, that they have to not have holes in them. It can't have holes in the cup. It has to be able to do it has to serve the function. And some of that is like telling a story that makes sense to you in the end. And whether you want to be artsy about it or not, I'm good with that. I'm good with artsy. You know me. We've talked at this point. I will take an indie. I will
you're fancy. That's it.
Yeah,
you're fancy.
Yeah, I think we all have moments of fancy.
You're so artsy. You just gave us that whole thing about the cup. I'm gonna have to listen to this podcast a second time to be sure that I got it. But
but
just like Christopher
you got
Nolan,
it, John.
You know,
you got it.
I think one of the things that really bothered me was that I could not hear the movie.
Oh my gosh.
The fact that so let me give you some background on my experience with Christopher Nolan. I went to remember the limited showing of the Batman with Bane in it. Yeah, and they showed it in random theaters throughout, right? That was throughout the country. They did it in random places. I went to the Smithsonian with Ashley, one of our coworkers, and watched what may have been the hardest to hear thing I've ever seen in my life.
You're talking about that IMAX sequence that was the sort of heist sequence from the Dark Knight Rises. Yeah.
Bane's voice was inaudible.
Right.
You could
incomprehensible. You could hear it. You just couldn't understand it.
You can only hear the engine. Like I'm telling you, like you could not hear what he was saying. So you could see that, Lord, you could see his mouth moving.
You could see Bane's mouth moving?
Nothing was coming out. You could see it moving. Yeah, you could see like the top part and the bottom.
All right.
You could see it. Right?
Calm down, John. Calm down. We get what you're saying, Ronald.
So to the point where like people had to complain, and then I heard, the theatrical version, which had kind of a version where the audio was sitting on top of the movie, where the audio of the movie was here, was at a lower level, and then Bane's voice was sitting on top of it.
Right.
So I can't figure out if this man has a problem with audio. Like maybe he's deaf. Maybe that's the thing. Maybe
wasn't that like a fuck you move in a way that like after people complained, he went and stuck Bane's voice in like this awkward. Just didn't sound. It sounded like it was piped in. It didn't sound like it was in the scene at all.
It didn't sound like it was a thing. It was in the scene, and that has been like a problem for me. Like I feel like there are things throughout his movie, even Inception, because I've watched a 4K version pretty recently, where there's just inaudible dialogue. Like it's just like the music's too loud, and that was what is he doing? I guess that's
I feel like it definitely was like it became the problem where everybody was talking about it with Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah, it became real.
And in this film's release, it's been exponential in terms of people talking about that, when it was in theaters and critics that were able to see it. And I totally agree with everything you're saying. Like, I feel like if not for subtitles, I would have probably missed half of this movie. Right. And, having to force subtitles is not like, not that I'm a fan of subtitles. Like sometimes I just have them on anyway.
Yeah.
But it's just like, to use that as, or for me using it as a crutch, because there's a couple of scenes in Tenet, like specifically when Brannigan and the Becky are on that boat, and like he's basically telling her the whole thing, like if I'm a tiger or whatever that thing was he was saying. That whole scene on that boat, the mix of that whole thing was probably the worst of what you're describing in the movie. Like you could hear the boat's engine more. The ship's engine more than you could hear their dialogue. And that's like, it's a really weird thing. And you got to believe that there's like, there, it can't be like the exception that all these people are like complaining about that. Like film critics, cinephiles, audiophiles, like people who have a very like educated opinion on this type of thing. And I'm not saying I'm that at all, but I've watched a lot of reviews and I listened to a lot of podcasts where people were literally saying the same thing you just said. So yeah, I don't know what the cause is, or like, you wonder, like, half joking, like, is he have a hearing problem? But it's not even that. It's just, it's got to be in, the way he just likes the mix, like with the sound and everything, like the sound editing rather than the mix itself. But I don't know. It is really weird, and it was distracting. Like beyond what we will discuss in terms of like thinking about the movie. Like you've already kind of gotten on that topic, but the audio thing outside of just the movie quality, anything like that, the narrative, the plot or lack of, it's just it's very distracting. It's a problem. Like I totally agree with you. And even to speaking to what you were saying, like, in terms of like, this is like a time travel movie, or the cup is a cup analogy that you just used, like it is that. And I think that kind of is something that he's becoming known for, that it's almost becoming a problem, but I think it's enabling though, because he is Christopher Nolan, and like he is the one, the golden boy at Warner Brothers. And that time is obviously changing, and we'll talk about that when we get to the news portion of this podcast. But like, I think the blank check nature, and this the type of filmmaker that he is, where he just, everything he does is kind of like marketed and presented and kind of packaged as like a shiny new thing, where it's really not that. Like you just said, like this is a time travel movie kind of mashed up with like a spy, globe trotting adventure film, that isn't really as impressive as it thinks it is. Honestly, I totally agree that it's kind of, it's a little pretentious, and it seems to think that it's like way more groundbreaking than it is. And I think that literally, that statement is what breaks the film, I think, because I think that it kind of becomes way too stuck on itself. And, and all of the, like, we'll probably, I guess, stay away from spoilers for the most part, because I don't know that we're not going to spend too much time, but like all of the ideas in this movie with time travel and inversion and going forwards and backwards, just the simple number of times that they do it, it really does challenge the viewer to really keep up and understand what's going on in this movie, beyond the audio problems, beyond narrative or a lack of plot. Like just the flex that it tries to make in terms of like, look how slick that was, like when he went through that turnstile. Wasn't that cool?
Yeah.
Wasn't that bullet coming out of the, like, and I'll say, like, a lot of the filmmaking I am impressed by. Like, I think that there is a lot on the screen that is impressive, simply because the scale of this movie is like massive. And, there are some shots that I think are really impressive, but that all falls very shallow for me if I'm not like completely into the story and completely into the characters, and like have any feelings towards any of the characters in the movie at all. And I feel like that was a big problem for me with this, is that I kind of felt cold the whole movie and did not connect with the protagonist at all, and really had no interest in like seeing the success of what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
What about you, John?
I mean, you guys have touched on so many of the things that, if you were going to go down the list of like things you've got to say about this movie, the sound design was horrible, or the sound mix was horrible. I mean, it's like whatever it is, whether it's an aesthetic choice, which I do think it is. I do think Christopher Nolan has all these stylistic tics that he kind of indulges in, and we kind of love him for it, and we sort of mock him for it, and obviously we're taking a little bit of a critical tone to this one, because it is so up its own ass, and it does spend so much time trying to explain this time travel concept that we sort of get, and it is cool the way they visualize some things. And I think the technical complexity of some of those scenes you're talking about, Steve, where there's things moving forward in time and backward in time, and you have to try to keep track of that. And that is the game of this movie. It is a genuinely complex scenario, but the story is really not that complex beyond that. And the characters, even though I was sort of glad we didn't have like scenes of them at home with their families, or someone's got a little girl that they're trying to save, I was sort of glad that the characters were devoid of those sorts of like scenes that don't have anything to do with the main thrust of the plot, because I don't think Christopher Nolan handles emotional material that well, or at least like normal human behavior that well. I was sort of glad not to have it, but in a 2.5-hour movie, you do end up with these one-dimensional characters after a while.
That's the key. Yeah.
I think the first hour and a half in particular are really self-important and tedious. I think once it gets to a certain, well, maybe even more like first hour and 10, 15 minutes, but it gets to a halfway point where you actually sort of, there's a pivot as far as how the movie's dealing with time and it's folding in on itself. And the midway point, I think it might actually be right in the middle of the movie is when this point happens. I think from that point on, it was a lot more interesting to me. Like the next hour and change was sort of like, okay, now I see what we're doing here. Yeah. But it was like, we didn't need all that time to set that up. I was reminded of, what's the Tom Cruise,
Edge of Tomorrow.
Edge of Tomorrow. I was reminded of that when I thought of, here's a movie that gets into a complex time concept and it does it quickly and you're off to the races within 10, 15 minutes. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I feel like it's very early in that movie you're in the cycle of what you're doing and you're just seeing iterations. And not to say that all time travel movies have to deal with it the same way, but I think all this sort of the kind of egotism we're talking about of Christopher Nolan's filmmaking, that is why this movie is 2.5 hours long and why it takes an hour plus to get to the real meat of what's happening. And also the stuff that is dazzling to look at and the sequences that are, you know, I do think a second viewing would make certain things rewarding about this movie, the way that the opening has all these details that later will make more sense. But I don't think it had to be so like, grandiose about what is essentially a really simplistic story, a really bare bones riff on like a James Bond movie with sort of familiar time travel concepts thrown in. What really makes it unique is the visualization of it. Like those scenes where, especially if you look at a making of, I did after the movie, I was like, let me find something to be passionate about. And I watched some making of stuff. And it was interesting to hear them, the stunt people, the people who coordinate those action scenes, all the training they had to do with the actors. Like there's a scene where, is it John David Washington? Is that his name? There's a scene where he basically had to shoot the scene 4 times. And you'll understand why if you've seen the movie, and play different parts within a scene. I think that is what's interesting from a technical standpoint. And I can see how everyone involved would be like, man, this movie is this interesting sort of experiment on this grand scale. But the actual movie that comes out at the end is kind of pedestrian in a lot of ways, except for those aspects, that Christopher Nolan scope, that scale that he tries to do as much as possible within like the practical physical world, and it's all in camera and CGI is minimized. That does make this movie feel special when you look at it, but I don't think that's enough. It just felt kind of like style and not a lot of meat.
No, that's totally it.
One of the things that really bothers me is the rules of the time travel have to be defined pretty early, or at least when the concept is introduced, right? When you present the idea of time travel, you have to simplify it enough that, let's think about Back to the Future or Looper. Looper to me is probably one of the better explanations of a time travel concept that isn't quite as popular as some of the others, right? So it happens, they explain the rules, and then they kind of show you a version of it happening. So they're like, hey, this is it happening. Oh, you can break this rule? Oh yeah, if you do this thing, you can break this rule, right? As I'm watching this movie, I didn't understand what the fuck was happening beyond the fact that the rules were the rules that they were. But that seemed wildly, it seemed like almost in the way that if you ask me what is time travel, I'm just like, it just is the ability to go back and forward. Nothing else.
Yeah.
I wish it was a little more intricate.
Yeah. I do think it reminded me of Looper in that one respect, in that the way that they handled time travel, it does have its own little set of parameters to it. But it was basically, they say whatever happens, happens, which is kind of what they said in Endgame, wasn't it? Wasn't that one of the concepts they explain in that? Which is that if something has happened, you can't undo something that's happened. You create a splinter timeline in that movie. In this movie, it's like you can just continue to refine the loop that you go back within, and you can have multiple passes at a situation, but you're not getting that sense of like again, what you're talking about with the rules, like the parameters of it, it feels like, again, they go to all this trouble to make it feel plausible. And then it takes these weird leaps. And then there's these moments where things happen that you're like, well, I'm not sure if that works that way. Like there's one moment that, and I think there were a lot of lines in the script that were there to be funny. And I really think that stuff falls flat. Yeah. John David Washington has a great physical presence. When the action starts, I thought he was great. I don't know that he has like, there's something kind of, I don't know, soft in his demeanor. I kept trying to find it to be like an interesting spin on the leading man, but it kept feeling like he wasn't quite selling some of the dialogue that he was being given. And that might be a fault of the script. Cause like I said, I think he was really convincing in the large part of the movie where he's running around and kicking ass. But you know, there's so many things in that with like the dialogue where they're selling these weird little jokes. And this one little moment that just struck me as like, now I'm really wondering, is after there's been an explosion and the reference to, because we're dealing with like inverted time. He's like, because this was an inverted situation, you got hypothermia from the gasoline fire. You know, and I was like, I don't know if that's how, if you reverse entropy, does that mean if someone burned up, they would get cold? You know, it's like, it was like a sci-fi concept where it was like, it was one detail too many, where I was like, wait, is that really, are you saying, is that like a character making a joke, or is that actually, you know, you're throwing in these little ideas? There's so much like that in this, where you feel them trying to make it plausible, and then they throw in something that's really far-fetched that they don't really question. Do you know what I mean? It's that weird Christopher Nolan mix, just like in Batman, the way he tried to make all the villains kind of grounded and bring them into the real world.
I think one of the things you just said, I was actually going to mention that I feel like this, more than any Nolan film, felt like the most miscast movie to me. Like I felt like people in the movie that genuinely like are good actors, actresses, like I like them. I do still think this is one more like strike for me against John David Washington. I don't know that I like him as an actor. I feel like I've liked movies he's been in, even like Black Klansman comes to mind. Like I love that movie. I don't love him in that movie.
Me neither.
And he stood out to me as like the weakest part of that movie. And I could not help but think the same thing in this movie, even though I didn't like really enjoy this movie all that much. And it's one of the, you know, weaker Nolan films in my rankings. The thing that stood out to me the most was just the lack of, like, kind of what you're getting at, John. I don't know, like he felt horribly miscast to me. And like, there's something about a lot of the scenes that he's in, with Elizabeth Debicki, with even, I mean, honestly, with like Robert Pattinson, who I think has like really turned the page and is like legitimately like great. I've loved him in mostly everything I've seen him in, once he's kind of gotten into this new stream of performances that he's chosen. And I do like him in this movie, but I think it does fall victim to what you're saying. Like the performance that he's giving in this movie, it is a little flat because I think of the script and like the movie itself. I don't think it's really able to reach a height that maybe it would have under different circumstances. But I don't feel that way for John David Washington's performance. Like I don't know, man. Like I immediately, like an hour into it, all I started thinking about was how I felt walking out of Black Klansman. And I don't know if it's like the type of movies that I feel like he works in. You know, I watched Ballers. I thought he actually was great on that show. Yeah. And that was like the best performance I've seen him give on his whole, you know, his whole arc on that series. But ever since he's kind of made the jump to feature films, like I don't think I've seen him in something that I really even liked his performance in. I know he's got a movie coming out that Sam Levinson did with, I think, who else is in that Netflix movie that they shot during the pandemic. I'm very curious to see if that works any better. But I don't know, man. That was like one of the big, like non-Nolan, like pretentious nature of this movie that really kind of left me cold at the end. Was I really just don't think I buy him as a leading man. It just did not work. I don't think his performance worked at all for me.
Steve, you've opened up a can of worms, man. God, you got me in this headspace where, okay, so I'll tell you, when you say that, what this feels like, you know how we were watching the miniseries on HBO with oh God, about the husband and wife in the murder.
The Undoing?
The Undoing, sorry.
Wow, that really stuck in your memory for a long
No,
time.
no,
that was
no,
like
no,
2
no.
weeks ago.
I don't blame you. I've kind of it's kind of drifted out of my mind too already.
Because I'm thinking about an idea that is very hard to articulate, but I'll try. You know how sometimes in The Undoing, there were clearly people that weren't from America that were putting on American accents. Sometimes when I hear John David speaking, there's an intentional, like, I'm going to say every word in the script without sounding natural that bothers the living shit out of me. That sucks the soul out of some of his performances. That feels like he's just going, oh, what do you think would happen if I were to go? I'm like, what's happening? It's not natural. It's not.
It sounds like he's running lines, Ronald. It sounds like whoever he's acting with, he's running lines with them. And he's just kind of giving them the flattest version of his line. And then they're giving a line back to him.
Yes.
I felt that throughout. I that exact sense you're talking about of like, there's this, it's almost like he has been trained, you know, like a newscaster or something, to lose any kind of regional dialect or anything that gives your voice flavor and then be as flat as possible, which could work if it had oomph behind it. But on top of that, he's kind of soft spoken. Yeah. And I think that sort of is the icing on the cake of what we're talking about. It's just,
And I think that the reason why the HBO show was as good as it was is it was something that he could attach himself to. He was a football player. You know, there's something in that script that he can grab onto. He's been in that situation. I don't know if he has the imagination right now, and this isn't like a permanent thing, to assume the idea that you could be this person. And that could be for a couple reasons, man. He is the son of one of the greatest actors of all time. That might be some sort of like formalness that he wants to give off, some regalness that he wants to give off to his performances that he is forcing the fuck out of, that drives me crazy. I couldn't figure out how to articulate it. You said it, and then I was like, oh, it sounds like a person that isn't from here trying to do an American accent, or somebody trying to be very intentional, or like you said, a line read. It sounds very bland. There were parts where I was watching it, I'm like, what the fuck is happening?
Yeah, but it's a very flat read. Like there's the scene when he's like talking to the arms dealer, the woman, and like
I was thinking of that one too.
Yeah, that whole scene when they're walking and talking about being the protagonist, and he's like, but I could be, and like, you know, that whole sequence.
It was very hard.
I was like, okay, I'm okay saying this on the podcast. If they don't agree with me, that's fine. But this dude is not right. Like something's not right.
We're all doing this.
Yeah. So, okay. All right. So this is what I figured out.
I want to say that I feel good that we're on the same page, because I was nervous about bringing that up.
When you said that about that scene, it's like, because that's the scene I was thinking of, the walk and talk scene where he stops and he kind of gets his finger in her face and he says, and you brought up too, the fact that he's called the protagonist. That's a pretty pretentious thing as well.
It is.
It comes up a few times. It's like Christopher Nolan likes to do that. He likes to tell stories that, like Inception, I think we talked about this, it can be taken as an allegory for filmmaking or for storytelling. And it's kind of cool in a way sometimes to have a movie that maps to an idea that closely. But I feel like in this movie, it just kind of smothers it to have those little notions that it's so worked out that the life has just been squeezed out of this world that you would literally have a lead character called the protagonist. It's not just that they don't name him in the movie, and then in the credits he's called the protagonist. That would be pretentious, but sort of okay. It's the fact that in the movie several times they refer to him as the protagonist, or he says that he's the protagonist. So it's sort of like, then when you watch the making of materials, guys, and you hear people calling him the protagonist over and over again, it really will bother you, because you're like, does everybody think this is clever like the 5,000th time they've heard it? Because it starts to seem like it'd be better just to say Jimmy, you know, at a certain point.
Yeah, so even him, he calls himself the protagonist even at the end of the movie. Like, oh god.
Dave Chappelle, one of his specials, does this thing where he says, I'm going to tell you, I think that I'm one of the best to ever do it. I'm going to tell you the punchline first, and then I'll work my way back. So he tells this amazing story. That's what it is. It is a writing exercise. It is like it's an admission that he is perceived to be, and may think that he is one of the greater storytellers of our time. And
I do think he thinks that.
He really does, man. Like, so okay.
And he can make a case for it. He's made some. He's made some giant, and like I can see why he wants you to see this movie on a giant screen. I can totally see that. I do think that it was diminished seeing it at home. I don't question that I would have been a little more swept away by certain parts of this movie if I'd seen it big. But yes, it's not. That's what he hangs his reputation on, and he's one of the few people that like beats his chest that much. I feel.
Yes. So he does something for me, man. All right. There's an inception going on as I watch his films now. I don't want anybody to tell me that M. Night Shyamalan's a bad director anymore. He's made bad movies. He's made movies that I don't think are great. But I'll watch something like that, and I can argue that no movie that M. Night Shyamalan has made is as pretentious or hard to understand as that movie was. I'm telling that. Tenet,
you're right. When M. Night gets that pretentious, he's easy to understand.
Yeah,
it's still,
yeah. There's something about the way that this movie was made.
Lady in the Water was pretentious and easy to understand.
Yeah, it was pretentious and easy to understand. This was pretentious and almost like, sure, man, we understood parts of it, but I bet if you were to say, if you were to have a definitive answer and you like, hey, I think the answer to this movie is this, he'd be like, no, that's not what it is. He has to have some sort of like idea in his head of what it is. And it didn't come across. This story was not told well. That's what it is. The story wasn't told well enough. And the pieces weren't, man, I never thought I'd ever say that about John David. So, I want to support John David because he is Denzel Washington's son. But this is a strike. This is not.
One thing you can say for sure is that the old man he's a trained actor. He taught him how to enunciate clearly.
Yes, because he does it so much. It's like, man, I have feelings about it. And there's some nuance to the conversation. And I will say, and if I could, there might be a fear in his head where he may not want to sound a very particular way on screen in context to some of these figures. He may not want to come across as like a, kind of lazy speaker or stereo.
The thing that supposedly they ask black actors to do all the time. Yeah, where they're like, could you street this up or whatever? Yeah,
like if he did a scene and Christopher Nolan stopped it and said, "Can you say that with a little more feeling? Can you say that a little more black?" You know what I mean? Like, I'm saying, like, I think that John David's made a decision as an actor to kind of like make himself almost like a computer. Like, I'm going to sound as bland in that, like you're right. No regional accent, no nothing, no affectation, just a voice that exists in the body of this person delivering this performance. But to me, what that does is it really takes away your identity. It really does make it feel like when I see Matthew McConaughey, I know that Matthew McConaughey can take his accent out a little bit, but I'm going to get a little Matthew McConaughey. And that's okay.
You also don't mind when you see Matthew McConaughey in like a medieval story and he's got a little bit of a twang. You're just like, well, he kind of does what he does. You know who is, speaking of accents and actors that are in this film, I did not know that Aaron Taylor Johnson is from Buckinghamshire, England. I always thought he was like from California or something. And I was watching this movie going, oh, here comes Aaron Taylor Johnson. And he's, for some reason, they have him doing this horrible British accent. And then I looked up and he's from England. Yeah. I was really surprised by that. He didn't strike me as English, but I really did think, man, he's slipping in and out of this accent, something fierce. This poor guy. I didn't dislike his character. I thought he was kind of an interesting part in the movie. But again, like Christopher Nolan likes to do, they throw in these characters who are, you don't really know, you don't have a frame of reference for why you should care about them, and then you get to the end of the movie and you go, oh, well, they were more important than I thought. But like, you don't take any particular joy in watching them emerge from the background, nor do you have moments you can hang on to. Yeah. There are moments in this that play as like they're supposed to be funny and they're supposed to be warm and that kind of fun, silly, campy part of this type of story. And I just feel like that stuff fell completely flat, like those little moments of witticism. And I think the stuff we're saying about J.D. Washington, the people who know him well call him J.D.
I get that.
Like it's like that again. I don't think he's not like to me, he was not a black hole of charisma. I really do think that like when he starts like moving on somebody, there's something.
Oh yeah.
You know, remember how we were talking about how fun it was to watch like Henry Cavill fight in Mission Impossible or what? Like certain actors are just fun to watch and I thought he was fun to watch when he was moving, but yeah, there's something lacking. And again, I think it has to do with the concept. It's this geared idea. You're watching, like cogs in clockwork produce something that's supposed to, at a certain point, make you go, oh shit, that's what's going on. Right. And Christopher Nolan loves to do that. And he has the patience to do that. Like a lot of filmmakers don't have the patience to put together something on the scale that he does. And the visuals will get you pretty far. But yeah, I think there's something in there with the characters and the acting in this that is the reason why it feels lesser than his other movies that are guilty of a lot of the same stuff we're talking about, the kind of pomposity, but they somehow pull it off with an emotional moment or a hook of some kind, you know?
Yeah.
I also thought the villain was really weird. Like, okay, if we're talking about John David, like let's really highlight the villain in this movie.
Well, the opposite form of acting is Kenneth Branagh, who like they're literally they're building new scenery behind him because he's just eating it as he goes.
Turn the volume on 150, and then like he was such a stereotype of a villain. It was very hard. You know what's weird though? The punch at the end, the part that was supposed to be like the emotional moment, kind of sat with me. You know, the idea.
Yes.
You know, whatever the
very last moment between.
Yes, the very last moment.
Yes.
Presenting that to a human being is devastating. Whatever the circumstances are with time travel and things like that, and then the punch at the end really did sit with me. But
you know why that part worked?
Why? Pattinson. There's something about, but that was
Pattinson is like the bit of warmth you can get from this movie. Honestly, he's the one guy who seems to be, honestly, as not just as an actor in the movie, but as a character, he seems to be the one guy who's having a little bit of fun doing this, or who has like a heroic attitude about just throwing himself back into it. And I like what it suggests about him, that he's just, he's just working this loop. Anyway, I don't want to say too much more, but John David, that last moment landed because of that felt real. The two men, their kind of partnership. That's the one sort of human. Well, I guess some of the stuff with Elizabeth Debicki, she's good, and so she's able to bring something to her part. But I still felt like her relationship with John David Washington was hard to categorize, and might be because of his colorless acting that we've been talking about.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, I don't know. In general, it's definitely like subpar Nolan for me. I mean, I'm generally like a big Nolan fan. Like I love Dunkirk, his last film, and really most of the movies that he's put out I've loved. So even the ones, even the Batman trilogy, which, varying degrees of general popularity, but in general, I do enjoy all those movies. But this is definitely a step down for me. Like it definitely got to a point where it felt a bit too pretentious, a bit too full of itself, and like really kind of just trying to be clever for clever's sake and like do something different, where it really wasn't doing anything different besides being like more like compounding, like confusing, it was like intentionally trying to do that. But yeah, I agree, John. Like I feel like I would have rather seen this in the theater just for the experience. I do think there's some filmmaking on display, and just like some of the technical achievements that's there. Like I do respect and appreciate that, and I could definitely give the movie credit for that. But as a story, as a a narrative, it just didn't work for me. And this would be I don't even know how we would say this, like a hold up or a wait for it. I don't know. We waited for it already.
You know what though? It's like you've already waited for it, or we haven't waited for it yet.
Right. Wow.
Yeah. Oh,
I don't know.
Don't mess me up with time loops, man.
Yeah. We've mentioned how like some of the screenwriting was kind of hard for some of these actors to deal with. There's one moment that really stood out to me. I mentioned the little joke about gasoline freezing somebody, that I'm not sure if we were supposed to think that's really what happened. But there's another part. Do you remember the part where they're like Elizabeth Debicki has just found out that what's going on to some degree, and they're talking about how this is going to be, and they say this is going to be the end of the world, and we know that she loves her son, and they keep underlining that she loves her son. And there's a part where someone says, if that happens, it will destroy every living thing that's ever existed. And she says, including my son.
Yeah.
That's the kind of screenwriting that these actors have to deal with to be like establishing their character. You know, there's clunky stuff left and right in this movie, but it definitely, like, they try to keep you apprised of the important things. So I think we've kind of alluded to this already. It's not really that complicated of a storyline. It didn't have to be presented in this convoluted way that makes it kind of hard to follow. But I don't even think that's the main thing that you carry out of this, is that it's hard to follow. I think it was easier to follow than it was for me to sit through, in a way. Like, one thing about watching it at home I liked is at least I could pause. Honestly, that first hour and a half, I was like, this movie sucks for like the first hour or so. And then it started getting and then the stuff that happens later makes the stuff that happened earlier a little bit more interesting, because you're contextualizing it differently. But yeah, I guess this is lower tier Nolan for sure. What's your favorite Nolan before we wrap this up?
Oh, damn. Probably either. Oh, man, that's tough. I'm thinking.
You know, I love to pick the undercard.
Memento.
Memento is an easy pick in a way, because that's the one that really established it. But I feel like The Prestige doesn't get a lot of
love
that's
The Prestige.
A lot of talk.
That's what I'm saying. Like, he's got movie. Like some real, like, I mean, I genuinely think he's like quite impressive. Like, I love all of his movies pretty much. Like, I love Inception. I love Dark Knight. You know, I like Interstellar a lot, especially the way I saw Interstellar was an experience. Like that was like fucking amazing.
Yeah.
Just theatrical experience. Like, that's the one that of all of them, probably, that's been like, that just blew me away.
But I mean, Memento and The Prestige are both puzzle movies too.
Yeah.
And yet they work because
absolutely.
either the acting or the characters are more clearly drawn.
Totally.
But
I don't know.
It's money, man. It's money. It's like when Lucas didn't have a lot of money to make a movie. It does, man. When Lucas didn't have a lot of money to make Star Wars, those things were easy to digest and fun and great. But once the money came around, they got real convoluted and weird. And I think that Christopher Nolan has the same issue. They're like, here's a couple $100 more million. And he's like, you know what? There's going to be time loops and fucking people walking upside down and running around. It's like, I love Inception, though. That's if we're talking about complicated films.
Yeah. But again, everything that John just said about Memento and Prestige, like, those things are present in Inception as well. Like, you have a lot more character development. You have a lot more in terms of, like, just, you know, you start to, you know, there's empathy happening, and, you know, there's just much more connection to the story on a personal level. But yeah, I don't know. We can chalk it up. We can move on.
Yeah.
So moving away from Tenet, there's another movie that comes out next week. It actually comes out theatrically Christmas Day. I don't think it has anything released for like any kind of PVOD or streaming window yet. I don't know if they're holding on to the 3 months. I doubt it. But Carey Mulligan stars in a movie that comes out called Promising Young Woman, which was like a really big title that was buzzed about a lot at the beginning of 2020 before the world broke, and at the festivals, I think at Sundance, and I heard a lot of people talking about it, and I did get a chance to see it to review basically for this podcast. We're not going to go too far into it, but I just wanted to mention that it comes out next week. I want to also mention that I actually thought the movie was great. It's actually kind of like the opposite of how I felt about Tenet, which is that there's like a lot of character stuff happening, a really great performance from Carey Mulligan, and actually a really just impressive cast. Like, there's a huge cast in this movie that kind of makes it feel pretty special. It's very timely. It's kind of like a revenge thriller, very timed to this, you know, to the Me Too movement, and one of the maybe more impressive ones that have come out since the start of it. And again, I think the real takeaway from it is Carey Mulligan. I think she's really pretty great in mostly everything I've seen her in, but I think she does something real special in this movie. And Emerald, I think it's Emerald Fennell, the writer director of the movie, who some people know from like Killing Eve, and I know that she was Camilla Parker Bowles on The Crown. But this is impressive. Like, this is like, I think, her directorial debut for feature film, and I thought some of the filmmaking in this movie is awesome. The soundtrack is awesome. The score is great. Yeah, I don't know. Like I thought this movie was great, and it really kind of left an impression on me. And I would definitely recommend checking out if that sounds at all interesting to you, whether it's in theaters next week or when it comes to whatever streaming service or digital rental that it probably comes to in the beginning part of the year. Because I do think it's probably going to be one that maybe gets some buzz around awards season for the performances and maybe even the movie. I don't know, but definitely for Carrie at least. But yeah, it's called Promising Young Woman. It comes out Christmas Day.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder, Steve. Honestly, I would have watched it for this episode had I remembered that you were going to mention it. But I've been really curious about it, and it has been getting kind of universally great reviews. If people should just see the trailer, it definitely is the kind of subject matter that has to be handled carefully. But I guess from what I've heard, it seems to be doing that. Like a lot of people like you have mentioned how timely it is. So
yeah. So I think those are the two features that we're going to have, and then we're going to move on to some news, right? Like there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And we're trying to kind of condense this down as much as possible so we don't go for 2 hours on this.
Okay.
Right.
So where do you want to start, Ronald? Like I'll throw it to you. You kind of dropped some news items you wanted to bring up.
I wanted to talk about what has been considered a tirade, but Tom Cruise's screaming session, yelling session with regards to COVID-19 practices on set of the movie that he was filming.
Right.
I just, this is a strange time we're in. And I think some of it is kind of, everybody's getting triggered. We all have our sensitivities, but a man trying to protect people can come across a little crazy if he's yelling at the top of his lungs. But I don't think people realize how dire the situation is with COVID. It's one of those weird things. We've all had friends and have read a post where somebody's like, "Oh my God, I didn't know how crazy COVID is. My family member has died." I've read about 5 or 6 of those. One was a kid because they went to a cookout and didn't pay any attention. We're just kind of hanging around, had some people around. Kid got sick, died within 2 weeks of getting COVID. And
right.
Look, I'm not here to judge that part about it. People's practices with regard to other people is what makes this so serious, right?
Sure.
If you want to get other people sick, that's cool. I mean, if you want to get yourself sick, that's cool. But getting other people sick and affecting their well-being is what is the issue with practices, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah. It's, how do you guys feel about it?
I mean, I don't know that like the way he handled it is probably fully appropriate.
Right.
But I do feel that it's definitely on brand for Tom Cruise because he is probably the most that's totally Tom Cruise, and that's not to dismiss it or to okay that behavior because I don't think that the behavior is probably necessary. But I feel like the motivation or the intention or the real, what he's saying is, I think what he's saying is important personally. Like, I feel like the idea that, this is not a movie that he just stars in. He's a producer on this movie. So these are huge movies. Like the Mission Impossible movies are no joke. And these are huge productions. And I mean, you hear about, what he says in it is really accurate. If you read the industry stuff, which is that, these productions that are happening over in different countries that are not in the United States, they're being looked at and in terms of like, this is how you get it done. This is how you do it. This is how it works. So that, when you hear that it's not working over there, that does trickle down to make them change how things can operate here. So what he's saying, I think there's a lot about, the industry and, what works, what doesn't work. And like what that immediate impact is on not just the production, but like on people's livelihood, like you're saying, Ronald, and like he says in the thing, I don't know all the details on even like really what who did what and what happened. I didn't read all the details of it, but I mean, I just think in general though, like, being that outspoken about it and trying to be, I guess the intent is to be like a leader, a driver in terms of, or a producer, to make sure that things don't get shut down and that people aren't getting sick and that you're listening to what you're supposed to be doing. That I admire. I don't know that I can condone like screaming and cursing and, basically just going off on a bender in front of like a large group of people who you are to be seen as a leader. You know, some may be inspired by it, some may be empowered by it, but I don't know that that's the direct approach. And but yeah, I don't know. Like I think that it's important. What he said is important. I do genuinely believe that. Like I feel like they are an example. You know, they've been back in production for a long time. And, you know, the amount of money they spend on like testing and like, you know, all the precautions that are put in place just for people to like not follow them in their place of work is absolutely infuriating and frustrating to me. And honestly, like looking at it in my world, in my bubble, when I go out and see people not following things that they're supposed to be doing in their workplace, it's like it's disgusting to me, to be blunt. Like I feel bad saying that, but it really bothers me that, you know, people that have a job, that are fortunate to have a job, aren't taking it seriously enough so that they can keep that job and that people can keep coming to their, you know, to their workplace, you know, things like that. But, yeah, I guess though, in true Tom Cruise fashion, it's kind of turned up to 11 and, you know, kind of just out there.
If there had been a couch nearby, he would have jumped up.
He's probably on a couch. We don't know. But
yeah, that's what he stands on a couch so that he's, you know, he's as tall as the other actors.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it's hard for me not to just filter that through. There's something unseemly about a gazillionaire yelling at a couple of, you know, workers, so to speak. Like, I feel like there's something unsavory about the way he went about it. There's something that feels bullyish and, you know, we talk about full of himself on Christopher Nolan's side. Like that sounds very full of himself. There's a way to handle that that's not offensive, that wouldn't embarrass people, that wouldn't make the news, right. And it would be much more effective. So I think it's pretty disgusting, that kind of behavior. But I understand tensions ride high, and I understand that we all know that feeling of you know, about something, especially like you said, Steve. But these people were wearing masks. They were standing too close together, was my understanding. They were within 6 feet of each other. But again, I don't know how much he sees around the set, and it was the straw that broke the camel's back or whatever. So yeah, I can only say this is one of those items where I'm like, this doesn't seem like it should have made the news, you know, and there's a lot maybe that could have helped that. I think Tom Cruise would be the main guy who could have stopped it from making the news. But yes, these are serious things. And obviously, you know, an industry is trying to lurch back into life with productions like this. And when you hear about how they do it, and they're in production or they're finishing this and they're shooting that, and you go, oh my God, how do they do it? Well, it's because they have tight control and they have all these standards. So in some ways, that's an environment where the little slip up matters less, because people have been vetted and people are being tested and everything is being watched. But in other ways, it's like, yes, you're jeopardizing this whole operation if you don't follow these simple rules. So, I mean, you know, it's the same shit we're all trying to do right now. And yeah, you hate to think people were being cavalier about it or being brazen about it. That I don't know. As far as just slipping up, you know, I could totally imagine myself slipping up and standing too close to somebody, or looking over someone's shoulder if they were asking me a question or something, and you would just hope that in that moment you wouldn't suddenly have the rage of Ethan Hunt raining down on you. But yes, I think people hear that and you relate. It's a Christian Bale thing is what I thought of, like, you know, from a few years back. And I think people love that kind of shit because there's something kind of fun on a weird level about seeing that these people they have regular human emotions and that they can blow their top just like we could. But then you see like, oh shit, they actually get away with something much worse, because if you blew your top like that, you would be the one who was gone from your job, you know? So I don't know. There's a double standard for sure.
Selfishly, it felt kind of cathartic just like listening to him go off, because I feel like I've been in situations where I've just been like, I just like wondered, like, what are you doing?
Yes.
Do you not understand what you're supposed to do? Like, and I've just removed myself. I haven't said a word. I just left. You know, I've removed myself from an unsafe situation.
Again, I feel like the unsafe situation that I encounter or that you encounter is more unsafe, perhaps, than
possibly. I don't
know.
This
brief encounter was. We don't really know what happened. We don't know how severe it was. Just like we don't know if the guy who pissed Christian Bale off that day, if he really was just walking through doing what anybody would do, or if he was a guy who should have known better than to ever be where he was at that moment. You know, so it's like. You know, Tom Cruise didn't come up with anything as catchy as "Good for You," like Christian Bale movie.
As much as Tom Cruise would like to take credit for the system that's happened, and the NBA literally had a whole season of way more people in one place and did it, and nobody got COVID, and it was because of people actually listening to rules. And I think when
it's amazing what happens when you do that, right?
And I guess what's going to be very weird is, when we look at 300,000 people have died in the USA from COVID. I mean, there's no way around that number. And I think that maybe through the news cycle, people kind of act like this isn't a huge thing. It's a big deal. And I would be enraged if I saw someone not practicing the rules as well. And I think that somebody acting like a life or death situation being handled by somebody yelling at you isn't normal. I've seen people yelled at for less. I don't think that it's not. Of course, it's not right. Of course, it's not right to yell at someone. But if you're faced with the idea that somebody could give you a disease, give you a sickness that could kill you, I would probably yell at you too. I'd probably yell at you too. He was kind. That was the kindest yell I've ever heard in my life. He didn't even call them names. He didn't say you stupid.
He was saying you motherfuckers. There's a point in it when you like feel like he's looking at a guy and saying, "You motherfucker, don't look at me." Like he says that.
He says that.
Yeah, there is a part in it where he like calls out a person, not by name, but you could tell like in the space he's looking at a person. He says like "you" or something like that. Like, don't you ever do that again? Or he says something along those lines. It is. It is inappropriate. Like I don't.
So inappropriate.
I don't agree with the delivery. I do completely understand and back the message though.
Oh no, 100%. Like the fact that again, I don't care
what the scope was.
Right.
I don't care if it was like the 6 feet thing. Like if that's what you're told that you should be doing to keep this production running, please like do not fuck up. Like just keep it going. Like for everybody's benefit. Like you've been doing this so well for so long. Now it's not the time to like drop off and like fuck around or whatever was happening. But yeah. I mean,
well, right. I guess the story I heard did not sound like people were fucking around. The story I heard, it sounded like two people had drifted close to each other and could have been told, hey, watch what you're doing. And it would have been fine. That it didn't need to be this excoriation, threatened of being fired and all that stuff. But if that's how you like to parent, Tom, then, you can be that way on a film set too, I guess.
Yeah.
That said, I can't wait for the next Mission Impossible movie.
No, I'm so glad they're making it,
especially after the Tenet experience.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Honestly, you want to,
I feel like you want that. That's the fucking movie to watch. Those movies are aces.
So is it going to be like so? When movies get made now, is it going to have like a made in a safe COVID environment in the corner of a poster? Now?
I hope so.
It's feeling
it should
like
be tagged at the end of it, like in the little like shot on location in London while practicing COVID. Whatever.
It's going to be like a little angry Tom Cruise face that's just going to be stamped in the corner.
Yes. In like a Mr. Yuck, like
Tom Cruise protocols were enacted
with a mask. All right, what else we got? We gotta get through a couple more things here. Well,
you mentioned Dave Chappelle earlier. He was in the news this week. There was kind of an interesting thing that I find this an interesting story because it shows you something about Dave's clout, but it also shows you something about this notion in the modern age we have that something is available and it should just be available forever. And it's just going to be on some service or another. And the way you almost feel ripped off and angry when you look for some well-known thing and you find that it's not readily available. I do have that feeling, but I also recognize that things don't have to exist and be available forever. And this week it was at HBO Max that agreed to finally pull Chappelle Show, the entirety of Chappelle Show, for the time being, I guess, until he settles whatever financial situation he has going on. But Netflix agreed to take it down recently too. Obviously, they're in business with Dave Chappelle. The bit you referred to earlier, Ronald, is from one of the specials he's done. I guess Netflix probably gets a lot of play on those. They've done a couple, like a couple blocks of them at this point. So, I mean, I don't know. To me, that's both a sign of how these companies are wanting to play ball with Dave Chappelle, and they know that he's felt burnt in the past by the way that his work was being received and handled. And now he's talking about who's profiting off of his work. And then, the other side of it is, the thing you love, it could, the creator might like to see it taken down. You never know, so it's just like, I don't know. Things won't always be available forever. Yeah.
It's a strange thing. I mean, I guess that's one of the things that's really cool about purchasing things yourself is that you have them, whether it's digital or physical. That purchase is actually yours for the most part. Like I've never had someone just say, hey, this thing that you own, we're going to take this away from you.
Except for that time you lent me that Blu-ray and I never gave it back.
Oh, damn it. That is one example. So I guess that could happen. There are exceptions to the rule. And I think that there's something really cool about, the history of things being taken from artists that they complied. I mean, it took a little longer than Netflix, but they complied, which means that the business, it's so strange, the idea that a person can make something and not profit from it, right? So I guess you could contractually do something like that. But is that a good thing? Are you a good person for doing that? And what's also a very weird layer to it is the people that probably set that standard of him not getting paid may not even be employed there anymore. Yeah. So it's up to the people that currently work there to make it right. And it seems
and to continue that forward.
Yes.
Like to consider that for future,
Yeah. So
no, it's interesting.
Congrats, Dave.
Yeah.
Hopefully you get your money.
No, I was about to say the best thing would be if he got paid what was fair for what he was contributed, but
now nice little pivot. Speaking of HBO Max.
Yep.
Look at that. Finally.
As
of today, recording this podcast, it's finally available on Roku. Yep. I know they announced that it was like on the, what was it, PS5, or it was like that same day they announced it was going to be there too. But the big thing was the Roku, and we were talking about this. There's probably not much more we can say about it besides celebrating it. Is that it simply is like the final thing that they were missing, and it's like the week before Wonder Woman 84 rolls out, day and date on their platform, there's no doubt that the 50 million people, I think, that subscribe to Roku or that run off of a Roku platform will have the ability to sign up and check out Wonder Woman, which I plan to watch on my Roku on Christmas Day.
It's exciting stuff,
and it's amazing that it lasted. I'll be honest, it's amazing that it lasted that long. And if this rollout, this distribution model change didn't happen for Warner Media or HBO Max, I don't know, when it would have ever happened, because I think there's a weird thing happening with HBO Max where their numbers are so bad that they've burned bridges, with filmmakers like Nolan, we mentioned, with Denis Villeneuve, from Dune, all these people are speaking out.
Yeah, I was going to mention that Denny has joined the fray.
Yeah, his letter, I read that earlier today. They're kind of speaking out, the creators, the production companies, that had no idea. Legendary has spoken out about Godzilla vs. King Kong. Just this idea of, what they decided to do to kind of promote a platform, HBO Max, but possibly and the way they went about it seems questionable, it's just all these pieces are moving into place, where they have it on all the platforms now, and they've decided to put all these movies out on it now to try to get subscribers. But in the effort of doing that, they've definitely lost Christopher Nolan. He's gone. He's completely shit on Warner Media, and
that was a big that was one of the few that I can think of those modern director studio relationships that lasted so long and was so huge. So that seems significant. I have to admit, I'm kind of split. I think we've talked about that decision, and we like the fact that we're going to get to see those movies soon. And I don't like the idea that it's going to do permanent damage to the theatrical model. But I also can imagine being one of these directors and just thinking, well, you're not so much that. I don't really buy into the whole idea that, oh, you're hurting my art because it needs to be seen in the sacred chapel of the cinema. I mean, we all want that. We'll all get back to that as soon as we can.
Totally agree.
What I think is more strange about it is the very thing you were just talking about, Steve, the fact that if I were Denis Villeneuve or if I were Christopher Nolan or any of the other directors affected by this, I might be so what? I'm just part of the package you're trying to offer subscribers now. That I'm incentive for people to subscribe to your service. That does feel kind of it's okay, now when I start to think about this as an AT&T decision, this is not a creative decision. Yes. I can see that. I still feel that's Denis Villeneuve's kind of open letter thing was a little bit juvenile to me about the whole I love cinema or whatever, long live cinema. But I also think that Dune is clearly a movie that has been made with this kind of the kind of quality control we're talking about with a Christopher Nolan movie or a Mission Impossible movie or something, where they're trying to show you something that you can't see any other way. and seeing it on the giant screen. That would be a shame if by the time Dune comes out next year, we're not going into theaters yet. And you don't get to see that stuff giant. I can see why that would be crushing on a certain level, but it feels a little entitled to make such a big deal out of it when people are dying. I don't know. To me, it just feels like there are bigger deals, but it is an interesting thing. And I'm always going to side with the creative people on a certain level. But it's more about, were they sneaky about the way they did it?
It sounds
less about what they did
like
for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I do understand the idea that this would frustrate people. The movie experience is a unique one. But part of me wonders if this might be one of those situations like, in the 90s when television wasn't considered legitimate art to actors, when there was a time when if you would have told Julia Roberts that she'd be on a TV show, limited series, she would have spit on you.
On a streaming service.
Yeah. So let's
what is that? She would have said.
Yeah. I mean, there's an idea that
you're right.
Maybe sometimes historical context for things is very hard for people to see. That you're trying to look at the roof of a house from the front door, and you sometimes you got to back up a little bit and you can see what's going on. There's something about the way that this is framed. Even by the way that Christopher Nolan talks about this stuff, sounds like an old person. And I don't mean like old in the way like age. I mean like rigid. In the way that they're older people that move with the times, that can deal with new things. And there are people who are 20. I mean, this could be somebody that's 20 years old. That's like this thing can't be a thing because I've never known it. That's right. Okay.
Or this can't be real because I'm watching it at home. I feel like that distinction exists in their minds much more so than it does for the average viewer, even viewers of a certain age like myself, where it's like I don't feel like I'm downgrading. Some of my favorite stuff has been made for the home screen, So to think that oh my God, people are going to lump me in with Better Call Saul and Mad
Queen's
Men
Gambit and stuff like that.
Queen's Gambit and it's like, okay, yeah, a lot of great stuff has been made, and for a few years there, different people were saying, oh, the best stuff is being made for television. So this notion that somehow deflates it is a problem. I do think, though, when you're talking about sheer spectacle, I think even Wonder Woman 84, when we see it, as much as we may enjoy it, some part of our brains is going to know, oh, that would have looked cooler.
Oh, for sure.
50 feet across.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I still feel like this whole idea of getting it going and getting this content to people, and I know that there's a lot of artistic people out there that hate the word content, but I just mean getting stuff to people where they live right now and making it easier for people to follow these rules that we're talking about, that we follow. I don't know. I just feel like it's a weird thing to cry about, but I get that on a perfect day where there's nothing else to argue about. The idea that streaming services are making these, or that companies are making these unilateral decisions to please shareholders, and they're kind of shunting the artists off to the side. I do think that that's damaging in time, and especially for someone who takes himself as seriously as Christopher Nolan. You're going to lose that kind of, like, whatever you want to call it, prestige signing that you have for your studio if you treat the artists that work for you that way.
Yeah, I agree.
Agreed.
Yeah.
What else we got? Anything else that wanted to talk about?
Was there any other news? Was there anything else?
I honestly think that might be it.
I mean, that might be it for me too.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Did you want to have see anything else you wanted to mention, Ronald? Any other reviews? Little quick.
No.
Way you haven't watched anything else.
This movie cut to just a spinning top.
Well, you guys tell me what you've seen, and let me.
I've seen nothing. I've seen nothing except for Tenet. Since we last recorded, dude. Seriously, I like it's a task. Like, give me 2.5 hours to watch a movie. Wow, that's a success in my book. But I've seen nothing else.
Let me think. No, I honestly.
Well, just save it. Okay, go ahead.
I did see one movie. I did see the Drew Barrymore movie, The Stand-In, about the stand-in for a very famous star. It's kind of like a Melissa McCarthy, kind of a physical actress, comedic actress.
Like her
Who,
double
yeah, her double. Yeah,
takes her
she's
place in
actually,
rehab or something.
yeah, she's called a stand-in throughout the whole thing, but she is a double. Absolutely. And while the actress decides she just kind of wants to give up, the stand-in takes her place.
Okay.
And it's interesting. It's definitely a commentary on the way that women are perceived in the business. It really is like a dark comedy, and I thought it was pretty solid.
Cool.
I enjoyed it. I thought it was okay.
Update on News of the World. I still haven't seen it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I reissued a screener link, and that link also is not working.
Steve, man,
It lets me access it. I'm working with them now to try to get this fixed, but it's like, yeah, it's working, and I get in. And it's like, you currently have nothing assigned to you. Like, cool. I'm never going to see this movie.
I'm so sorry,
Man. But yeah,
that's awful.
that'll be an ongoing thing on this show until I guess it comes out next week.
Yeah.
But we'll see if I see it by the time it comes out. Cool. All right, man. Well, yeah, I plan on trying to watch a couple things this coming week because I got a couple things lined up. Oh, you know what? I did watch one thing. I'm lying to you. I watched Come Play.
Oh, how was Come Play?
Have you seen it, John?
No, I was very curious about it though.
It's
I like the people
weird.
that are involved.
It's weird. I think for the most part, it's not very good.
I accidentally downloaded an adult film called Come Play.
Yeah, that's where you went wrong.
Yeah.
Also, not very good.
Yeah. No, really not. Really not.
No, it's weird because like some of it is really good. Like some of the stuff, like it's got this like, the idea is that there's like this, this autistic child who, John Gallagher Jr.'s and Gillian Jacobs are his parents, and he basically stumbles across this creature that lives in this other world that like communicates with him through the screens, like our screens in the world. Like we've become so isolated and addicted to screens that there's like something on the other side of it that is as lonely as we are, or it perceives it's as lonely as we are because we're so reliant on screens. And he especially is because of his, the autistic child is because of his need for the screen all the time. It's how he talks and he watches shows. Like it's what he connects with. There's like a specific connection, like SpongeBob SquarePants in the movie, which is super. Yeah, it's like a random little like thing that's in there. But some of the stuff is really cool. Like there's some really like kind of chilling sequences, and it's got like it is an Amblin production. It definitely has that vibe to it where they're really, and this is no spoiler, but there's really not any like dire stakes. Like, there are moments of genuine fear and dread and, like overall lack though of like death, I guess, where it feels like it should be happening or it could be happening. Some of the performances are really kind of not that great. A lot of the kid actors in the movie aren't that great. Especially the lead child, I thought was like, I don't know, just something was off. But it was weird because I kept going back and forth on it because there'd be a couple runs where I'm like, oh, that scene was awesome. Because it does a lot with like electricity and like it using the creature, his name is Larry, like using the power from our world to cross over into it.
Yeah.
And
his name is Larry.
And it's like creepy because like it presents itself as like a story. And like you read the story on your tablet or your phone or whatever. And the further you get into the story, the closer you are to this Larry character. And like that's what enables him to like cross over and like and reach out and kind of be your friend, and there's something to that works in the movie, that it is really kind of sad and like kind of scary that there is something.
It kind of sounds like a creepypasta.
It is.
Sort of Slender Man kind of
it
thing.
Sounds it's very reminiscent of Slender Man, and yeah, creepypasta is a great. Yeah, I'm sure it pulls from something, but I don't know. Like it was okay. Like I thought like it kind of got really cheesy towards the end of it, but there's a couple really cool sequences like with what they do with the idea of like lights and like lights going out and using that as a means of telling where this creature is, which was kind of cool. And I really love John Gallagher Jr. Like, he's not in the, he's the father. He's not in the movie a ton. It's more of the mother son or the key parts of the movie, but I really like him, so I'd like to see him in more stuff.
He was great in 10 Cloverfield Lane.
Oh my God, so good. But that also is a great movie.
Yes, that's right.
That helps between that and this.
There's
but yeah, I don't know. That was the one I got up early one morning. I watched that and I completely forgot about it. But yeah, I did finally get to watch that. I'm kind of like trying to chip away at all these movies I've kind of backlogged. And yeah, that was one it was like an hour and 25 minutes. Like, yeah, I can make that happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, but not so great. Not so great.
Dang.
But on to better things. Hopefully next week we'll be able to talk about some more stuff.
Yeah.
Before Christmas. Unfortunately, we won't be able to see Wonder Woman or Soul, it seems, but we'll have to check it out and catch up after we both or all of us see it. Yeah. After we see both of them, maybe talk about both of them the week after. But do you guys have anything else you want to mention, say?
Not I.
Put out into the world?
Well, if you're going to get started on that, we could go for another hour.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, movieschmovie.com is the site, facebook.com/movieschmovie. We're also on YouTube where we have the videos going up now. So if that's your preferred way to watch this, that's awesome too. You can find us on YouTube. And yeah, man, if you still listen to the podcast, if you're listening to this on a feed somewhere, please subscribe, please rate, please review. It's been something we've said for every single episode. I think that since we started doing this podcast, we still don't have very many reviews or ratings, mainly on like Apple Podcasts. So if you do listen to us on there, we really appreciate it if you could just do a rating, even if you don't write a review. I don't want to take too much of your time. Just do a little rating. That'd be great.
Please.
We're low maintenance.
Yeah, it's super simple.
We do so much for you.
Unlike a Christopher Nolan movie, it's super simple.
One little thing from you,
Yeah,
one little review.
Just one thing. Cool. All right. Well, we'll see you next week. And guys, good seeing you both.
Yes,
as
absolutely.
Always. Yeah, and as always, you made our day. Thanks.
Bye.
See you guys.